In the Sri Lankan legal system, as in many others, the primary role of making laws lies with the legislature, Parliament. However, when laws are unclear or incomplete, it is the judiciary's duty to interpret them. This task of interpretation has evolved over time, guided by rules and principles that help judges reach fair and just conclusions in difficult cases. Some judges, like Dicey J., have historically insisted that their role is strictly to interpret the law as it was enacted, without stepping into the shoes of lawmakers. But the reality is that the complexities of life often leave gaps in legislation. Courts need tools to bridge those gaps and apply the law in ways that serve justice and the broader public interest. These tools come in the form of interpretation rules, the Golden Rule, the Mischief Rule, and the Purposive Rule, each allowing judges to adapt the law to changing circumstances without overstepping their authority. The Golden Rule provides that judges should interpret statutes literally, but with a sense of flexibility. When the literal meaning of a word or phrase would lead to an absurd outcome, the Golden Rule allows judges to modify the interpretation just enough to avoid this absurdity. Case example: Munasinghe v. Tharmalingam, 1954. In Sri Lanka, the Munasinghe v. Tharmalingam case illustrates the Golden Rule. The court had to interpret a provision of the Rent Act. The literal interpretation would have led to an outcome that clearly contradicted the legislative intent, which was to protect tenants from unreasonable eviction. The judges opted for a modified reading of the law to avoid this injustice, ensuring that the purpose of the Rent Act, to protect tenants, was preserved. The Mischief Rule directs judges to consider what problem or mischief the law was intended to remedy. This rule is particularly useful when the law is not explicit about how to handle a new situation. Judges focus on the legislative intent behind the law, rather than its literal words. Case example: Don Solomon v. The Queen, 1959. In the famous case of Don Solomon v. The Queen, the courts in Sri Lanka used the Mischief Rule to interpret the penal code. The issue was whether an individual who assisted in a crime without direct involvement could be held liable under the penal code. The Mischief Rule helped the court conclude that the purpose of the law was to punish all parties involved in the mischief, including those indirectly aiding the crime. Purposive Rule. The Purposive Rule, also known as the teleological approach, encourages judges to look at the broader purpose behind a law. Rather than focusing solely on the language used, judges consider what Parliament intended to achieve when the law was passed. Case example: Sriani Silva v. Idamalgoda, 2003. In the landmark case of Sriani Silva v. Idamalgoda, the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka employed the Purposive Rule when interpreting provisions relating to police misconduct. Here the law seemed unclear about the extent of compensation available to victims of police violence. The court considered the broader purpose of protecting citizens' rights and interpreted the law in a way that ensured justice for the victim, aligning with the spirit of the Constitution. This case is particularly significant, as it overruled the earlier judgment in Somavathi v. OIC, where the court had taken a literal interpretation that restricted the scope of constitutional remedies for police abuse. The court in Sriani Silva departed from the strict literal approach, embracing the purposive interpretation to expand protection for victims of state violence, ensuring that justice is not limited by technicalities in the law. In Sriani Silva v. Idamalgoda, Justice Shirani Bandaranayake invoked the equitable maxim ubi jus ibi remedium, where there is a right, there is a remedy. This maxim played a pivotal role in the judgment, as it reinforced the idea that the law must provide an adequate remedy for violations of fundamental rights. By applying this principle, the court expanded the scope of constitutional protections, ensuring that victims of police misconduct could seek redress, even if the law did not explicitly provide for such remedies in its literal form. This equitable approach demonstrated the court's commitment to ensuring justice and accountability in cases of state violence. Over time, judicial interpretation has become a vital aspect of ensuring that the law remains relevant in a changing world. Whether through the Golden Rule, Mischief Rule, or Purposive Rule, judges in Sri Lanka balance the need to respect the letter of the law while also fulfilling its spirit. In many ways, this evolving role of judges underscores the dynamic nature of the law. While Parliament writes the laws, it is often the courts that bring them to life, interpreting, applying, and sometimes shaping them to ensure justice for all.